Hi, welcome to More Christ. I'm Marcus. Today I'm joined by George Weigel. George is a Catholic American author. He currently serves as a distinguished senior fellow of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. George was the founding president of the James Madison Foundation and is the author of many books, including a best-selling biography of Pope John Paul II, Witness to Hope, and recently To Sanctify the World, the Vital Legacy of Vatican II. So, just to begin then, George, I suppose what inspired your love for things like political analysis and not quite social activism, but social trends and some of those things that you write about?
Well, my life, Marcus, has been much less dedicated to Catholic thinking about politics, whether that's domestic social policy or national policy, in the last 15 years of my professional life than it was in the first 15 or 20. And that's because writing the biography of John Paul II was a kind of pivot in which my professional life, my vocation, if you will, turned. But I was fascinated by public affairs, by history, from the time I was a boy. So when it came clear to me that there was a distinctively Catholic way of thinking about these things, we call that Catholic social doctrine, that layered another dimension into this long-standing fascination. And I've tried to keep the two of those dimensions connected for over 3 decades. And the period in the year when I'm most engaged with that is in July. Every year I lead a seminar in Catholic social doctrine in Krakow, in John Paul II's city in Poland. And we do a lot of political theory there, Catholic social doctrine, and whatnot. And occasionally I touch on these things in my weekly column.
Excellent. Thank you, George. And then were you a cradle Catholic or how did you come to
Yes,
love Christ?
my family have been Catholics for quite a while. I grew up in Baltimore in what was then kind of intact Catholic environment, or at least reasonably intact Catholic environment. I described that in the first letter in my book, Letters to a Young Catholic. And I think young people find that chapter particularly intriguing today because they don't know what an intact Catholic culture is. I mean, they have had no experience of this. So to describe what that was like is a distinctive, striking experience of learning for younger people today. And that obviously had an influence on me. Baltimore, where I grew up, was the first Catholic diocese in the independent United States. Maryland, the state in which I was born, which I live today, was originally founded as a kind of refuge colony for Catholics during a time when being Catholic publicly in England was not an easy thing. So I'm in a sense the heir of a history that goes back to 1634 here in the United States. And that has undoubtedly had an influence on my life and my thought and my writing as
well. Excellent. Thank you, George. And I'd love to look at a few key influences in your life. So you're in the rare position, I suspect, of having been friends with both Pope St. John Paul II and late Pope Benedict. How did you get to know each of those gents, and what are some of your lasting memories of each, I suppose?
I actually knew Joseph Ratzinger longer than I knew John Paul II. I met Cardinal Ratzinger in 1988. We were in contact really until just a few months before his death. Our last extended conversation was in person was in October 2019. He was exceptionally helpful to me when I was preparing Witness to Hope, the first volume of my John Paul II biography. And we stayed in touch in the more than 20 years after that book was published. I became fascinated by John Paul II shortly after his election. I did a lot of writing about him before I ever met him. I then, without having met him except very briefly, after a morning mass in the Vatican in 1991, I wrote the first book making an extended argument that the Pope and the Church had been instrumental in the collapse of European communism in 1989. That was the book called The Final Revolution. And our first extended conversation, John Paul II's and mine, took place when I gave him the finished product of that book in September 1992. He had actually read the book in proof before that through the mediation of a mutual friend. And I think he appreciated that analysis, not because I made him the hero, but because I suggested that conscience and culture had been key to this nonviolent overthrow of a tyrannical political system. And that was certainly his view of what had happened. The relationship developed from there. And then in 1995, I had this crazy idea that I should write his biography because there were so many bad ones being written. I frankly thought I could do better than this. And he agreed to cooperate in the sense of providing me access to him, lots of interview time, etc. On the other hand, he never saw a word of that book till I handed him the final product in September 1995. The relationship continued after the publication of Witness to Hope. The last time I saw him in person was about 10 days before Christmas in 2004, shortly before he went into the hospital at the beginning of his last illness. And then in 2010, I fulfilled the promise I had made to him at that dinner in December 2004 that I would finish telling his story, which I did with the second volume of the biography called The End and the Beginning. So all in all, that biographical work on John Paul II went from 1995 to 2010. That was a good 15-year period. And I have continued to write about him and, of course, about Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, ever since.
Excellent. And you've hinted at it, I think, in part, or at least part of why John Paul II is so important. Why, I suppose, are each of those popes so vital, perhaps in very different ways? And what do you hope that Christians will take away from each of their lives and works now looking into the future?
What made both of these men the outstanding churchmen that they were is that both were radically converted Christian disciples. Men for whom a deep personal relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ was absolutely central to their lives. Men who lived out from, if you will, a life of prayer. I often say to audiences here in the United States and elsewhere that John Paul II prayed his way into every major decision that he made as Pope, whether that was a decision affecting the life of the church or something in the realm of world politics. He prayed his way into those decisions, and I'm sure that was true for Benedict XVI as well. So the importance of that deep personal friendship with the Lord, I think, is exemplified for all Christians by the witness of these two great men.
Beautiful. And when thinking about this interview, I wanted to try to give a big picture view of your body of work and touch upon some key themes that I think I've hopefully rightfully discerned. So you mentioned there has been a bit of a shift beyond more kind of obvious political writing and so on. But I'd love to go back to some of that and see if we can explore that in a way that's worthwhile. So you've written several books: Catholicism and the Renewal of American Democracy, The Cube and the Cathedral, Europe, America, and Politics Without God, The Fragility of Order, Catholic Reflections in Turbulent Times. I think much of your witness in this respect is still very relevant, and you've wrestled with the public Catholic witness and the political order. What are some of the distinct qualities in the USA where you live that Catholics can offer, I suppose?
My impression, Marcus, is that there is a much more visible Catholic debate about public life in the United States than there is in most of the rest of the world. I think the social doctrine of the church has been taken much more seriously here than perhaps anywhere else, and not simply at a theoretical. I mean, the Germans would say, well, we've been thinking about this stuff and writing volumes about it for well over a century and a half, but to which I would say, okay, well, where's the cash out of that in actual German public life? Whereas here in America, there is both a theoretical and a practical, if you will, dimension to this Catholic public witness. That in the past half century has expressed itself most powerfully in the pro-life movement. Now, it would be a serious mistake to think that the pro-life movement in the United States was exclusively Catholic. That was not the case. There was a huge involvement of evangelical Protestants, some Orthodox Jews, some Muslims, some agnostics and atheists. But the Catholic witness was very powerful, and it was distinctive in that if you read the public statements of the bishops of the United States between 1973 and last year, 2022, on this issue, they are making genuinely public arguments. They're saying two things. First, the product of human conception is a human creature, period. That is elementary biology and embryology. We know that. This is a human being with a distinct genetic makeup and a internally generated capacity for development. That's the scientific point. As for the public policy or constitutional law point, it's an elementary truth of any just society that innocent human life deserves the protection of the law. So you put those two things together and you get a robust legal defense of the right to life from conception until natural death. That's what our bishops have been saying. They have not said, look, you have to believe in the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary in order to get this argument. You have to be able to recite the Nicene Creed to get this argument. If you read the brilliant opinion by Justice Samuel Alito in the decision that reversed the horrible Roe versus Wade decision of 1973, the Dobbs decision of last year, Justice Alito's, if you were the proverbial man from Mars reading that opinion, you would have no idea that Justice Alito was a Catholic. It's a straightforward constitutional law issue. Now, of course, to sustain a commitment to the legal protection of unborn requires a certain spiritual gravity in a society. And that's the next step here in the United States, is rebuilding what John Paul II called a culture of life, because only a culture of life will sustain the legal protection of life and the legal cherishing over time.
Excellent. Thank you, George. And on that point, actually, there seems to be a lively debate, especially, I think, in America, amongst, say, post-liberals, generally, integralists, and so on, about the common good, that culture of life of which you just spoke, some faults with modern secular liberal anthropology and so on, modern consumerism. I suppose there's Catholics in different camps. With that said, what gives you hope amidst such rigorous, maybe even combative conversations? And what are some of the bedrock principles that should be shared then to ensure that there's a real integrity to Catholics' political philosophies then?
Well, let's begin with this integralist business. I wrote a column a couple of years ago called Games Intellectuals Play. And that's essentially what Catholic integralism is. Catholic integralism does not have a coherent, achievable agenda for the reordering of American public life or any other public life. I mean, they're raising some interesting questions about the need to restore a sense of the common good to the public discourse. But when this Catholic integralism attaches itself to the notion that American democracy was ill-founded, that the kind of craziness we see in our culture and society was baked into this from the 17th century on, this is just nonsense. If it was baked in, why didn't it show up 200 years ago? This just doesn't make any historical sense. So if people want to pursue these as kind of intriguing thought exercises, fine. But it was not these people who sustained the pro-life movement in the United States for 50 years. Moreover, I think integralism is fundamentally mistaken in its conception of the church. The church is not meant to run the state. And everywhere in the world where the church has been, the institutional church, has been intimately identified with state power or with one political party, this has been very bad for the church. And where you are sitting, Marcus, is a classical example of that.
Definitely.
In this continent, Quebec would be a very interesting example of that. Quebec, 70, 80 years ago, was one of the most religiously vibrant parts of the Western Hemisphere. I mean, if you drive through rural Quebec today, you see all these little villages and towns named for saints. And yet today, Quebec is the most religiously arid desert between the North Pole and Tierra del Fuego. I mean, it's just a disaster. And that has a lot to do with this close identification of the church with, in the case of Quebec, a particular political party. So those are some things to be said about all of that. The question before all of us right now, wherever we fall within those conversations that you mentioned, is how do we rebuild a truth-based public culture? How do we help a very large society? I mean, there's 330 million people in this country. That's a lot of people. How do we convince a critical mass of our fellow citizens that freedom is not license, that freedom is not personal willfulness, that freedom is a matter of choosing the right thing for the right reason as a matter of habit. Rather than, singing with Frank Sinatra, I did it my way, and thinking that that's the full meaning. How do we reconvert the culture to a truth-based understanding of the exercise of genuine freedom? That's a multi-generational challenge. Whether it can be successfully met, I frankly don't know. I frankly don't. I mean, I would have thought maybe 10 or 15 years ago that things had gotten so crazy that there was going to be an inevitable backlash and reconsideration. Now with the trans movement, which is a fundamental denial of human nature, things are even worse than could be imagined 10 or 15 years ago. On the other hand, dramatic social change is possible, and that is almost always generated by people of conviction who demonstrate by the quality of their own lives that there is a nobler, happier way to live than living in the playpen, the sandbox of personal willfulness. So that's what we need to be, in the witnessing to nobility business in order to help turn this around.
Amen to that. Thank you, George. And do you see different issues at the core of Europe's future, or what are some of the key issues you see facing Europe, and what role do you think the church should or could play here? Do you think it's the same basic problem?
It's the same basic problem. I don't think the resources are available in Europe yet that are available here. And of course, Europe's a big place too. Ireland is not Lithuania.
Yeah.
Poland is not Spain. Italy is not Denmark. So we'll see what how these things are going to work out in different European environments. I think what we know does not work from both the perspective of the vibrancy of the church, as well as the reconstruction of a truth-based public moral culture, is what's going on in Germany. What's going on in Germany is the undeniable failure of what I have been calling for 22 years now, Catholic light. Like Coca-Cola Light. We had first there was Coke Classic, and then there was Coke Light. Well, now there's Coke Zero, and it seems to be the case that Catholic Light leads to Catholic Zero. And the church needs to learn from that throughout Europe. Catholic Light is not an attractive proposition in the postmodern world. Integral Catholic Catholicism, in the best sense of integral, meaning comprehensive, and integrated into personal life, culture, society, public life, economics, etc., that can be attractive. And the living parts of the world church are those that exemplify this kind of what I sometimes call all-in Catholicism. The other thing I think that we have to grasp throughout the Western world, but particularly in parts of Europe, and here I would very much include Poland, ethnic identity does not transmit Christian faith anymore in these cultural circumstances. I mean, that has been proven sadly true in Ireland, Spain, Portugal, parts of France. And I said to a group of bishops in Poland 4.5 years ago, if you gentlemen don't understand that 30 years from now, Polishness will not transmit Catholicism. The ethnic heritage faith is really not possible under these cultural circumstances. 30 years, Poland's going to look like Italy. Where there's this visible crust of Catholic life and culture, but there's not really much going on beneath that. This is why John Paul II talked about the Church of the New Evangelization, or what I called in a book of a few years ago, Evangelical Catholicism, a church in which everyone is a missionary and everywhere is mission territory. The Catholic Church throughout Europe has to wrap its head around those two ideas.
Excellent, thanks, George. And you've also written about this evangelical Catholicism, deep reform in the 21st century Catholic Church. What then, if you can tell us a bit more, what does that evangelical Catholicism look like, I suppose, in contrast to that ethnic Catholicism that we're lamenting, and I suppose also the darker sides of American evangelicalism, as the term is often used then?
Well, what I mean by evangelical Catholicism has nothing to do with American evangelicalism. So evangelical simply means gospel-centered. And you can talk about this as Christocentric Catholicism. The essential ideas are the ones I just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Everyone is a missionary, and everywhere is mission territory. Mission territory is not exotic parts of the world where brave people go to bring a gospel that has never been heard. Mission territory is your kitchen table, it's your neighborhood, it's your business, it's your life as a consumer, it's your life as a citizen. And everyone is a missionary. Everyone has a baptismal obligation to share with others the gift that we were sacramentally given on the day of our baptism, which is the gift of personal friendship with the second person of the Blessed Trinity, the incarnate Son of God. Every one of us has to share that in one fashion or another with those around us. That's rather different from a Catholicism of institutional maintenance, which can count on the cultural transmission of the faith. If I'm Irish, I'm Catholic. If I'm Polish, I'm Catholic. And the task now is to turn all of those institutions into launch pads for mission. And then in the book Evangelical Catholicism, I describe what this might mean in terms of the evolution of the papacy, the way bishops function, the clergy, priests, consecrated religious life, the lay vocation, the liturgy, Catholic education, all of it being aimed at answering the Great Commission of Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all nations. Institutional, cultural, and in some cases national inertia carried the faith for centuries in parts of Western Europe. That is over. That is over. If the faith is not proposed, and it can only be successfully proposed if it's proposed in full, then the kind of crumbling we've seen over the past several generations is going to continue, and that would be a tragedy.
Absolutely. And on that theme of mission, you've also written The Next Pope, the Office of Peter and a Church in Mission. Between Vatican I and II, we saw some very different emphases. Just building upon that, what does the office of Peter look like today, or should it, in your view, according to that book?
Well, one of the problems, if I may put it that way, of having an extraordinary figure like John Paul II at the center of Catholic consciousness about the church and the center of the world's consciousness about the church is that the whole business becomes excessively popocentric, if you will. This is a misunderstanding of the nature of the office. The papacy exists to safeguard the deposit of faith, to be the center of unity of a complex and diverse religious community, and to, Luke 22:32, encourage your brethren. But the Pope is not the sum total of the Catholic Church. Bishops have local responsibilities. Pastors have local responsibilities. Every Catholic has responsibilities. And we can't wait for the Pope to do everything. The Pope can't do everything. What the Pope can do is give a vibrant witness to the truths of Catholic faith and embody them in his own outreach to people and his touching the lives of various people in the church. But there has been perhaps a bit too much over the last quarter century of people in the church at whatever level, lay people, parish pastors, diocesan bishops, religious superiors, saying, oh, they'll take care of it in Rome. We don't have to fix anything. Well, I'm sorry, that's an abdication of responsibility.
Excellent. I think that leads us nicely into the next book that I wanted to touch upon, To Sanctify the World, the Vital Legacy of Vatican II. So unfortunately, some Catholics have used Vatican II to justify almost anything, whilst it seems that others have tried to almost retreat to a past that never really was, I suspect. What balance do you hope to strike with your book on Vatican II and its legacy then?
I wrote To Sanctify the World to try to address three confusions or three questions around which there was a lot of confusion. The first question was this necessary? Was this a good idea? Because there are a lot of particularly younger Catholics today, serious young Catholics, who said, what do we need this for? Look at all this turmoil that's followed it. Wasn't everything just fine? Answer, no. But why was this necessary? Second question, what did Vatican II actually teach? And how are we to read its product, the 16 documents of Vatican II? And then the third question is, how is this to be interpreted? So the answer to the first question is the first third of the book. I explain why the essentially self-destructive character of a lot of Western civilization in the first half of the 20th century, a world becomes simply irreligious and therefore self-destructive, required a council to consider how to teach ancient truths in a way that the modern world could hear and therefore be converted. John the 23rd said a month before the council, the purpose of the council is evangelization. Okay? So that's why the council exists. We needed to effect a transition from this institutionally focused Catholicism of the Counter-Reformation to what would eventually be called the Church of the New Evangelism. Then I read the 16 documents of the council through the prism of its two main documents, the Dogmatic Constitution on Divine Revelation and the Dogmatic Constitution of the Church, and everything else flows out of that. Then in the third part of the book, I explain how this council without keys, a council that did not write a creed like Nicaea I, that did not condemn heresies or define dogma or write canons into the law of the church or commission a catechism. How this council without keys got its authoritative interpretation from two popes who were two men of the council, Karol Wojtyła of Krakow and Joseph Ratzinger. Ratzinger was, I came to understand fuller way in working on this book. Ratzinger was one of the three most important theologians in Vatican II. Maybe four, but certainly, top five.
Mm-hmm.
And Wojtyła was a very active younger bishop in Vatican. They both knew that the council was essential. They both thought of it as a great gift of the Holy Spirit to the church. And then over the 35 years of John Paul II and Benedict XVI, they provided the keys to the council without keys. And that's the third part of the book, is exploring those keys. So I hope that this book, which is in English and French now and will eventually be Spanish and German and Romanian and a few other interesting languages, will help reorient a discussion of the council, particularly for younger people. I mean, I really wrote this with serious young Catholics in mind. And before I even put a word on paper, I wrote probably emailed maybe 50 university professors, seminary formators, people working in campus ministries, and said, what do young people today need to know about Vatican II? What are the misunderstandings that you run into in your teaching or your pastoral ministry? And though the answers I got to that, which are a file about that thick, were very helpful to me in conceiving the book and then writing.
Terrific. Thank you, George, and thanks for writing it. And is there anything else that you're working on presently that you'd like to tell my viewers or listeners about?
No, at the moment, I mean, I've done 29 books since 1987, and I think I'm going to give the trees a rest for a while. I don't have a book project in mind right now. I have a weekly column that's a stern mistress. You have to come up with something every week. There are occasional articles that I do and whatnot, but I don't have a big book project on at the moment. We'll see if that changes over the next little while.
And where can my viewers or listeners find out more about you and your work then, George?
Well, my assistant has created a website that has, I think, a huge collection of my articles over the years. It's George Weigel, all1.com. And people can find things there. Then I have been for over 30 years at this wonderful research institute in Washington, the Ethics and Public Policy Center. It's a collection of really quite remarkable colleagues who are Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, deeply involved in this business of reconstructing the moral and cultural foundations of the public policy of the West, defense of the family, etc. And the center website, EPPC.org, is full of interesting stuff from, as I say, a very remarkable group of colleagues that I've been blessed to work with.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time today, George, and God bless.
Thank you.